The thunder cracked like a whip across the Montana sky as Eliza Sullivan clutched her shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders, the dusty main street of Riversbend turning to mud beneath her worn boots. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life that had drawn her westward now seemed like a cruel joke as another coughing fit doubled her over, the copper taste of blood filling her mouth. The rain came down in sheets, washing away the last of her strength as she stumbled, nearly falling face first into the muck when strong, steady hands caught her by the shoulders. Through rain-soaked lashes, she looked up to see a face both weathered and kind beneath the wide brim of a cowboy hat. "Miss, you need to get out of this storm," the stranger said, his voice deep and graveled from years of trail dust and campfire smoke. "I'm fine," she insisted, pulling away despite the world tilting beneath her feet. "Don't need your help." The man, tall and broad-shouldered with eyes the color of summer wheat, tilted his head slightly. "Name's Thomas Larson, madam, and I ain't one to leave a lady drowning in a downpour." Eliza opened her mouth to protest again when another coughing fit racked her body, this one more violent than the last. Thomas didn't hesitate. He swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all and carried her toward the nearest building, the town's modest hotel. "Put me down," she managed between ragged breaths. "People will talk." "Let him," Thomas replied simply, pushing through the door with his shoulder. That was how it began, with rain and blood and the stubbornness of a man who refused to walk away from someone in need. Neither of them knew it then, but that stormy evening would mark the beginning of a journey neither had ever imagined possible. Eliza had come west after the death of her parents, leaving behind the ashes of her family's failed textile business in Boston. The doctor there had warned her that her weak lungs might not survive another harsh eastern winter. The West, with its dry air and open spaces, was her last hope. She'd secured a position as a schoolteacher in Riversbend sight unseen, only to arrive and find her health deteriorating despite the change in climate. Thomas had been passing through, a man with calloused hands and a past he kept close to his chest. A cattle driver by trade, he'd recently sold his herd and was drifting, looking for something he couldn't name until the moment he spotted a woman swaying dangerously in the rain. Mrs. Holloway, the hotel proprietress, clucked her tongue in disapproval when Thomas carried Eliza through the door, but her expression softened at the sight of Eliza's pallor. "Room 3 is open," she said, already moving to fetch fresh towels. "I'll send for Doc Winters." Thomas nodded his thanks and carried Eliza up the narrow staircase, careful not to jostle her as another coughing fit overtook her. "You shouldn't," Eliza protested weakly as he laid her gently on the bed. "I'll ruin the coverlet." "Hush now," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a large man. "Save your strength." He stepped back as Mrs. Holloway bustled in with towels and a basin of steaming water. She shooed him toward the door. "Out with you now. The girl needs changing into dry clothes." Thomas retreated to the hallway, hat in hand, water dripping from his duster onto the worn floorboards. He should continue on to wherever the trail took him next. Instead, he found himself sinking into a chair outside the room, waiting for news of the woman whose name he didn't even know. Doc Winters arrived half an hour later, medical bag in hand, nodding briefly to Thomas before disappearing into the room. Another 30 minutes passed before the door opened again and the gray-haired physician emerged, his face grave. "How is she?" Thomas asked, rising to his feet. The doctor studied him. "You family?" "No, sir, just happened to be there when she collapsed," Doc Winters sighed. "It's consumption, not advanced, but she's weakened from travel and this weather didn't help matters." He closed his bag with a decisive snap. "I've left medicine, but what she needs is rest, good food, and clean air." He hesitated, then added, "And someone to look after her. Mrs. Holloway says she's the new schoolteacher, just arrived yesterday, doesn't know a soul in town." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I understand. Do you?" The doctor gave him an appraising look. "Good night, Mr. Larson, Thomas Larson, Mr. Larson." With a tip of his hat, the doctor descended the stairs, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. Mrs. Holloway emerged next, carrying a bundle of wet clothing. She's sleeping now, poor thing. Says her name is Eliza Sullivan, came all the way from Boston to teach our children. She shook her head. Doesn't seem likely now, does it? She'll recover, Thomas said with more certainty than he felt. Perhaps. Mrs. Holloway gave him a shrewd look. Will you be needing a room as well, Mr. Larson? Thomas glanced at the closed door of room 3. Yes, madam, I reckon I will. Inside the small room, Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, her dreams filled with the sensation of strong arms carrying her through the rain and a voice that promised safety. By morning, the fever had broken, but the weakness remained, leaving her barely able to lift her head from the pillow. A soft knock at the door roused her from a fitful sleep. Expecting Mrs. Holloway, she called weakly, "Come in." Instead, the tall cowboy from the previous night entered, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of broth and a cup of tea. He'd cleaned up, his face freshly shaved, revealing a strong jaw and the hint of a dimple in his right cheek. "Brought you some breakfast," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Doc says you need to eat, even if you don't feel like it." Eliza tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her chest. Without a word, Thomas moved to help her, large hands gentle as he arranged the pillows behind her back. "Thank you, Mr. Larson, but you needn't trouble yourself," she said, embarrassed by her weakness. "I'm sure you have places to be." "No place particular." He pulled a chair closer to the bed. "And it's Thomas, if you don't mind." "Eliza Sullivan," she offered, though she suspected Mrs. Holloway had already told him. "I appreciate your kindness, but I'll be fine now. The worst has passed." Thomas's eyes, a warm hazel that reminded her of sun-dappled forest floors, studied her face. "Doc Winters doesn't think so, says you need looking after for a spell." "I can't afford to stay here indefinitely," Eliza admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I was counting on my teaching salary, but if I can't start work." "The school board can wait," Thomas said firmly. "First order is getting you well. Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, harsher than she intended. If he was offended, he didn't show it. "My ma died of consumption when I was 10, he said simply. No one should face it alone. The raw honesty in his voice silenced any further protests. Eliza allowed him to place the tray across her lap, the warm broth tempting despite her lack of appetite. "The whole town will be talking," she murmured, taking a small sip of tea. Thomas's mouth quirked in the ghost of a smile. "Let him talk. Folks around here don't have much else to do." For the next 3 days, Thomas became her unlikely caretaker, bringing meals, fetching fresh water, and even reading to her from a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans he'd borrowed from Mrs. Holloway's small library. He never spoke of his past or his reasons for being in Riversbend, and Eliza was too weak to press him. On the 4th day, Mr. Peterson from the school board visited, his expression grave as he took in Eliza's pallor. "We were counting on classes starting next week, Miss Sullivan," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "The children have been without proper schooling since Miss Abernathy left to get married last spring." "I understand, sir," Eliza said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps if I had another week to recover. The thing is," Mr. Peterson interrupted, "we need someone strong enough to manage 20 children of various ages, if your health is fragile." "She'll be ready," Thomas spoke from the corner where he'd been quietly whittling a small wooden figure. "Give her 2 weeks," Mr. Peterson frowned. "And who might you be, sir?" "A friend," Thomas said simply. "Miss Sullivan just needs time to regain her strength. The doctor says the air here will do her good once she's over this spell." Mr. Peterson looked unconvinced. 2 weeks, then." "But if you're not fit to teach by then, Miss Sullivan, I'm afraid we'll have to send for another teacher from back east." With a curt nod, he departed, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Eliza waited until his footsteps faded before turning accusing eyes on Thomas. "Why would you promise that?" "You heard the doctor. This isn't something that passes in 2 weeks." "You giving up, then?" Thomas asked, setting aside his carving. "I'm being realistic," she countered, frustration burning in her chest alongside the persistent ache. "I came west because the doctor in Boston said the climate would help my lungs, but what if he was wrong? What if I never get better?" Thomas moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip. "My ma always said trouble doesn't last forever," Neither does sickness. Some sicknesses do, Eliza whispered, voicing her deepest fear. Thomas took her hand then, his rough palm warm against her cool fingers. Then we face that too if it comes. His eyes held hers, unwavering. But first we try. The word hung between them, fragile as spun glass. I ain't going nowhere, he said, the simple declaration filling the room like a vow. Something shifted in Eliza's chest then, an emotion she couldn't name rising alongside the fear and uncertainty. You don't even know me, she said softly. I'm learning, he replied with a slight smile. You're stubborn, proud, scared, but trying not to show it. His thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand, and I reckon you're worth knowing better. The next morning, Thomas arrived with not only breakfast but also a wheelchair borrowed from Doc Winters. Time to get some fresh air, he announced, helping her into a simple day dress Mrs. Holloway had pressed for her. Can't get stronger cooped up in here. Despite her protests, he wrapped her in blankets and carefully carried her down the stairs, settling her in the wheelchair. The simple act of dressing had exhausted her, but the prospect of seeing something beyond the four walls of her room was too tempting to resist. He wheeled her out onto the hotel's wide front porch, positioning her where the morning sun could warm her face without being too direct. The main street of Riversbend spread before them, a single dirt road lined with false-fronted buildings, the general store, a saloon, the blacksmith shop, and at the far end, the small white clapboard schoolhouse that was to have been her domain. It's a fine little town, Thomas commented, pulling up a chair beside her. Been here almost a week now, and folks are friendly enough once they stop being suspicious. And why would they be suspicious? Eliza asked, breathing deeply of the crisp mountain air. Strangers always get a second look out here, he said with a shrug. Especially ones who show up during a storm and start fussing over the new schoolteacher. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. I've caused you considerable trouble, haven't I? No trouble at all. His gaze drifted to the distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June sunshine. Truth be told, it's nice to stay put for a spell. You don't strike me as a man who stays anywhere long, Eliza observed. Thomas chuckled, the sound rich and unexpected. You got me there. Been on the move since I was 16. Worked cattle drives mostly, Texas to Kansas, Kansas to Montana. And your family, she ventured, just me since Pa passed 5 years back. He squinted at the horizon. He had a small spread outside San Antonio, sold it after the funeral, been drifting since. Eliza studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his temple, the way the sun brought out golden highlights in his light brown hair. He couldn't be more than 30, yet there was an old soul quality to him that spoke of hard years and harder lessons. And you, Miss Sullivan, what brings a Boston lady to the wilds of Montana? He asked, turning those perceptive eyes on her. Eliza smoothed the blanket across her lap. My parents died last winter influenza. Our home and business went to pay debts. The doctor suggested the western air might help my lungs, and teaching was the only respectable profession I was qualified for. No husband, suitors? He asked, then quickly added, if that ain't too forward. No, she said simply, my illness made me undesirable in Boston society. No man wants a wife who might not live to see their children grown. The bitterness she tried to keep contained slipped into her voice. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Their loss, he finally said, the words so soft she almost missed them. Each day after that, weather permitting, Thomas would take her out for fresh air, first on the porch, then short walks along the street, his arms strong and steady around her waist. As her strength slowly returned, they ventured further, to the small church at the edge of town, to the meadow beyond where wildflowers dotted the grass like spilled paint. During these outings, they really talked in a way Eliza had never experienced with anyone, let alone a man. Thomas told her of life on the trail, of stampedes and river crossings, of sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She shared stories of Boston, of literature and music, and the dreams she'd harbored before illness narrowed her world. By the end of the first week, Eliza could make it down the stairs without assistance, though she still tired easily. By the 10th day, she was helping Mrs. Holloway with simple chores, building her stamina. "You're improving faster than I expected," Doc Winters admitted during his weekly visit. "Still, don't push too hard, the lungs take time to heal." "She's got school starting next week," Thomas reminded him, his presence during the doctor's examination now taken for granted. Doc Winters frowned. "Half days only to start. And no staying after to clean the schoolhouse. Hire one of the older children if need be." He packed away his stethoscope. "And no more sleeping in this drafty hotel. You need a proper home with good meals and regular hours." "I've inquired about boarding with a family," Eliza said, "but it seems most households are already full or—" She trailed off, unwilling to admit that several families had been reluctant to take in a teacher with uncertain health. "What about the old Harper place?" Thomas suggested. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned it's been sitting empty since the family moved to Oregon last fall." "It's a bit isolated," the doctor mused, "nearly a mile from town. But the air is good," Thomas countered, "and it's a solid house with plenty of space." Doc Winters nodded slowly. "It would suit if she had help getting settled." His pointed look at Thomas didn't go unnoticed by either of them. After the doctor left, Eliza confronted Thomas directly. "You can't keep putting your life on hold for me. You must have plans, responsibilities." Thomas leaned against the windowsill, arms crossed over his broad chest. "I told you before I got nowhere pressing to be." "But why stay?" she pressed. "You've done more than enough." "I'm recovering. I'll manage the teaching position because I want to," he interrupted, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't identify. "Because for the first time in 5 years, I feel like I'm where I ought to be." The naked honesty in his words silenced her protests. They stood in tense silence until Mrs. Holloway's call for supper provided a welcome interruption. That night, Eliza lay awake long after the hotel had gone quiet, replaying Thomas's words in her mind. In the 2 weeks since he'd carried her out of the rain, he'd become essential to her in ways that terrified her. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the gentle way he helped without making her feel helpless, all of it had slipped past her defenses when she was too weak to maintain them. But attachment was dangerous. Her illness might be in retreat now, but Doc Winters had been clear consumption could return without warning, especially if she overextended herself. How could she allow Thomas to bind himself to such an uncertain future? The next morning, Thomas arrived with news that he'd arranged to view the Harper house that afternoon. Eliza met him with resolve, her sleepless night having solidified her decision. "Before we go," she said, keeping her voice steady, "I need to make something clear. While I appreciate all you've done, I cannot allow you to continue sacrificing your time and freedom. Once I'm settled in the Harper house, if it's suitable in teaching, our arrangement must end." Thomas's face revealed nothing, but she noticed his hands tighten on his hat brim. "Arrangement." "Your assistance," she clarified. "Your caretaking, I see." He set his hat on his head with deliberate care. "And if I said it ain't a sacrifice, it must be," she insisted. "A man like you has his own path to follow. I won't be responsible for diverting you from it." "A man like me," he repeated, the words flat. "And what kind of man is that, Miss Sullivan?" "A wanderer," she said softly. "A man not meant to be tied down." Thomas studied her for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes that might have been hurt before his expression closed like a door. "Well then, let's see this house before we decide what's to be done." The ride to the Harper place was silent, tension stretching between them like a taut wire. The house itself was modest, but sound a 2-bedroom cabin with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a good cast iron stove, and a small barn out back where a horse or cow could be kept. A vegetable garden, now overgrown, stretched toward a creek that burbled cheerfully along the property's edge. "It has good bones," Thomas commented as they walked through the rooms. "Roof seems tight, chimney draws well." "It's more than adequate," Eliza agreed, trying to imagine herself alone in this space, returning each day from teaching to an empty house. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with her illness. "Place comes with 10 acres, Thomas continued, his tone businesslike. Good water rights, enough space for a small herd if someone was inclined. I know nothing about cattle, Eliza said, running her hand along a rough-hewn shelf. No, I expect you don't. There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. They completed the tour in strained silence. On the porch, Thomas paused, looking out over the property. I'll speak to Mr. Harper about the terms. If it suits, you could move in before school starts Monday. Thank you, Eliza said formally. You've been very kind. Thomas turned to her then, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. It ain't kindness, Eliza. Before she could respond, he descended the steps and headed for the wagon, effectively ending the conversation. The school board approved her hiring officially the next day, with the stipulation that she would start with half-days as Doc Winters recommended. Mr. Peterson also informed her that the town council had agreed to lease her the Harper place at a reduced rate, considering her position. And Mr. Larson has offered to make any necessary repairs, he added. Seems you've made quite an impression on our drifting cowboy. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Larson has been very helpful during my recovery, nothing more. Mr. Peterson's knowing look suggested he believed otherwise, but he merely nodded. Well, the children are excited to meet their new teacher. 20 pupils, ages 6 to 16. Some are quite behind in their studies, I'm afraid. I'll do my best to bring them up to standard, Eliza promised, grateful for the change in subject. The weekend before school was to start, Thomas helped move her few belongings to the Harper house. Mrs. Holloway had contributed linens and kitchenware on loan until you get settled, while other townspeople, hearing of the new teacher's situation, brought housewarming gifts, preserves, a braided rug, a rocking chair for the porch. As the last of the well-wishers departed, Eliza found herself alone with Thomas in what was now her home. The silence between them had grown more comfortable over the past days, but there was still an undercurrent of things unsaid. I've stocked the woodpile, he told her, gesturing to the neatly stacked logs by the back door. Should last a while if you're careful, and I'll bring more before the snow comes. You don't have to do that, Eliza said automatically. Thomas's jaw tightened. I know I don't have to. Just like I didn't have to fix that loose board on the porch or patch the roof over the kitchen. He took a breath, visibly restraining his frustration. Just like I didn't have to pull you out of the rain that day. Eliza flinched at the reminder. I never asked you to. No, you didn't, he cut her off. But here's the thing about me, Eliza Sullivan. I do what needs doing, not what I'm asked to do. He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. And right now, what needs doing is making sure you're safe and settled. For how long? She challenged, her own frustration rising to match his. A month, a year, until I'm back in that sick, coughing blood again, because that's what awaits me, Thomas. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday. Her voice broke on the last word, understanding dawned in his eyes. So that's it. You're not pushing me away because you want me gone. You're pushing me away because you're scared of what happens if I stay. I'm being realistic, she insisted. You deserve better than to tie yourself to a dying woman. You're not dying, he said fiercely. Not today, not if I have anything to say about it. You don't get a say, she whispered, tears threatening. That's what I'm trying to tell you, this illness. It doesn't care about what we want. Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she chose, and brushed a stray curl from her face. I've known men facing a firing squad with more hope than you're showing right now. Hope is dangerous, she said, closing her eyes against the gentle touch. Life is dangerous, he countered. Every day I worked cattle, I knew it might be my last. Stampede, rustlers, flash floods, 1,000 ways to die didn't stop me living. Eliza opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What are you saying, Thomas? I'm saying I ain't scared off easy, he said simply. Not by illness, not by the future, and certainly not by a stubborn schoolteacher who thinks she knows what's best for me. Despite herself, a small laugh escaped her. I am rather stubborn, aren't I? Bullheaded, he agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting in that half-smile that had become dear to her. But so am I, which means this conversation ain't over, not by a long shot. He reached for his hat. But for now, I'll leave you to rest before your big day tomorrow." At the door, he paused. "I'll be by to check that chimney before the weather turns cold." "Thomas," she called as he stepped onto the porch. When he turned, she added softly, "Thank you for everything." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Sleep well, Miss Sullivan." As she watched him walk away, Eliza realized with startling clarity that regardless of her protests or her fears, Thomas Larson had somehow become essential to her world. And that terrified her more than any illness ever could. The first day of school dawned clear and warm, a perfect late June morning. Eliza had been awake since before dawn, her stomach knotted with anticipation. She dressed with care in her best blue dress, pinned her hair in a neat bun, and ate a light breakfast before setting out for the mile walk to town. The schoolhouse was already alive with activity when she arrived, children of various ages clustered in the yard. They fell silent as she approached, 20 pairs of curious eyes assessing their new teacher. "Good morning," she greeted them, summoning a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I'm Miss Sullivan." A small girl with braided red hair stepped forward, offering a slightly wilted bouquet of wildflowers. "I'm Mary Hutchins. We're real glad to have a proper teacher again." Something tight in Eliza's chest eased at the child's earnest welcome. "Thank you, Mary. Shall we all go inside and get acquainted?" The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions, assessments, and establishing rules. By noon, when she dismissed the children, Eliza was exhausted but exhilarated. The pupils were a mixed group, some advanced, others barely literate, but all seemed eager to learn. As promised, she kept to a half-day schedule, waving off the children's protests that they usually stayed until 3 o'clock. "We'll work our way up to full days," she assured them. "For now, use your afternoons for chores and reading the assignments I've given you." She was gathering her things when a shadow darkened the doorway. Looking up, she was startled to find Thomas leaning against the frame, watching her with a mixture of pride and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "How'd it go?" he asked, stepping into the schoolroom. "Better than I expected," she admitted, unable to suppress a smile. "They're bright children, most of them. Even the older boys who I feared might be troublesome were respectful. Word got around that you're under my protection," Thomas said with a wink. "No one wants to cross the tall cowboy with the Colt revolver." Eliza laughed, the sound echoing in the empty classroom. "And here I thought it was my natural authority." "That too," he conceded with a grin. "Ready to head home? I brought the wagon." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. The walk had taken more out of her than she cared to admit, and the prospect of Thomas's company was too appealing to refuse. As they rode, Thomas filled her in on town gossip he'd picked up while repairing a fence at the livery stable. "Mrs. Holloway thinks the blacksmith is sweet on the widow Parker, but he's too shy to call on her properly. And the Reverend's wife is organizing some kind of social for next month harvest dance or some such. You seem to have settled into town life quite comfortably," Eliza observed. "For a drifter." Thomas shot her a sidelong glance. "Maybe I'm finding reasons to stay put." The implication hung between them, neither acknowledged nor denied. At the house, Thomas insisted on building a fire and heating water for tea before he left. "Got a job helping break horses at the Wilson Ranch," he explained. "Might not see you for a couple of days." "You don't need to check on me daily," Eliza said, though the thought of not seeing him created an unexpected hollow feeling. "I know," he said simply, "but I will anyway." True to his word, Thomas continued to be a steady presence in her life as summer deepened into early autumn. He never stayed overnight, propriety wouldn't allow it, but he was there most evenings, helping with chores, bringing supplies, or simply sitting on the porch with her as twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Word spread quickly in the small town that the new schoolteacher had a dedicated admirer, but rather than scandal, the relationship seemed to generate approval. Thomas's protective nature and Eliza's obvious improvement under his care had won over even the most conservative members of the community. By September, Eliza was teaching full days and had even started a small ladies' reading circle that met weekly in her classroom. Her health continued to improve, the mountain air working the miracle the Boston doctor had promised. Though she still tired more easily than she would have liked, the coughing fits were rare and no longer brought blood. One crisp Saturday morning, Thomas arrived with his wagon laden with supplies and a mysterious covered object in the back. "What's all this?" Eliza asked as he began unloading sacks of flour and sugar, tins of coffee and other staples. "Winter's coming," he replied, nodding toward the mountains where the first dusting of snow had appeared on the highest peaks. "Need to stock up before the passes get difficult." "Thomas, I can't accept all this," she protested, calculating the cost of such provisions. "Already paid for," he said firmly. "Consider it an investment in the education of Riversbend's youth." "An investment," she echoed skeptically. He set down a crate of preserves and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Eliza, there's something I need to tell you," her heart stuttered. This was it, he was finally leaving, moving on as she'd always known he would. She braced herself, determined not to show how much the thought pained her. "I've bought land," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The Carson place just over the ridge from here, 500 acres, good grazing land." Whatever she had expected, it wasn't this. "You're staying in Riversbend?" "Planning to," he confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. "Going to raise horses, got some good stock lined up from a breeder in Colorado, build a proper ranch." "That's wonderful," she said, genuinely pleased yet confused by his solemn demeanor. "But why do you look so serious about good news?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Because there's more. I'm building a house, a good one, with glass windows and a proper kitchen, room enough for a family." The implication of his words slowly dawned on her. "Thomas." "I know what you're going to say," he continued, stepping closer. "That you're still not fully recovered, that there are no guarantees with your health, that I deserve someone whole and healthy." His voice grew rough with emotion. "But here's the thing, Eliza Sullivan, I don't want anyone else. I want you stubborn, frightened, brave, beautiful you." Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring her vision. "You can't mean that. 6 months I've known you," he said softly. "Watched you fight your way back from the brink, seen you win over those children, build a life here. You think in all that time I haven't thought about what I'm getting into? But what if I get sick again?" she whispered, voicing the fear that had kept her from acknowledging her deepening feelings for him. "Then we face it," he said simply. "Together, the way we've faced everything else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I'm not asking for an answer today, just asking you to think about it." He pressed the box into her trembling hands. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found someone worth settling down for." Eliza stared at the ring, 1,000 emotions warring within her. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Thomas advised, closing her fingers gently around the box. "Just promise you'll consider it, consider us." She looked up at him, this man who had carried her through the rain and refused to leave her side when she was at her weakest. "I promise." He smiled then, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. "Good. Now help me unload the rest of these supplies, and I've got something else to show you." The mysterious covered object turned out to be a rocking chair, not a purchased one, but one he had crafted himself from cedar wood. The joints fitted perfectly, the seat and back curved for comfort. "For the porch," he explained as he set it in place. "Thought you might like a proper place to sit while grading those papers you're always carrying home." Eliza ran her hand over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, Thomas. When did you find time to make this?" "Evenings, mostly. Wilson let me use his workshop." He looked almost shy as he added, "There's a matching one at my place. Thought they might look nice side by side someday." The simple statement, filled with hope for a shared future, broke through the last of Eliza's resistance. She had been so focused on what might go wrong, on protecting him from potential heartbreak, that she'd nearly denied them both the chance at happiness. "Ask me again," she said suddenly. Thomas looked startled. "What? Ask me properly," she clarified, her heart racing. "Right now." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee before her, taking her hands in his. "Eliza Sullivan, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she breathed, the word carrying all the certainty she had lacked these past months. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, his expression grew serious again. "I can't promise it will always be easy," he said, cupping her face in his hands, "but I can promise you'll never face another storm alone." "Nor will you," she whispered, raising on tiptoe to press her lips to his in their first kiss, a gentle, questioning touch that quickly deepened into something more assured. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably speak to Reverend Clark about setting a date. Soon," Eliza agreed, "before winter sets in." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Are you certain, Thomas, truly certain that this is what you want?" His answer was another kiss, this one leaving no doubt of his conviction. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Holloway wept openly, while Doc Winters beamed with satisfaction. The children from the school presented them with a handmade quilt, each square representing a different pupil's good wishes for their teacher and her cowboy. Thomas's house, their house, wasn't yet complete, so they began their married life in Eliza's small cabin. The intimacy of those first weeks was a revelation to Eliza, who had never imagined that physical love could be so tender, so affirming of life itself. "You're sure I'm not hurting you?" Thomas asked on their wedding night, his concern for her health evident even in this most personal moment. "I'm not made of glass," she assured him, drawing him closer. "I won't break," and she didn't. Instead, she blossomed under his love, growing stronger with each passing day. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late October, blanketing the mountains in snow and turning the creek behind their cabin into a ribbon of ice. Thomas's foresight in stockpiling supplies proved valuable as the town was cut off from regular deliveries for nearly 3 weeks during the worst of the storms. Their new house was finished just before Christmas, a handsome 2-story structure of squared logs and stone, with a wide wraparound porch where the matching rocking chairs sat side by side. The move was accomplished during a brief thaw, the entire town turning out to help transport their belongings over the ridge. "It's too much," Eliza protested when she saw the spacious rooms, the gleaming cookstove, the built-in bookshelves Thomas had crafted to hold her growing collection of books. "Nothing's too much for you," he said, swinging her into his arms to carry her over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Larson." That first winter tested them in ways neither had anticipated. The cold brought on occasional respiratory distress for Eliza, though nothing as severe as her previous episodes. Thomas fretted when she insisted on continuing to teach despite the harsh weather, often riding with her to the schoolhouse when the drifts were too deep for her to walk safely. January brought influenza to Riversbend, striking hardest among the very young and the elderly. Eliza threw herself into caring for her pupils, bringing homework to those too ill to attend class and organizing the women of the town to provide meals for affected families. "You're working too hard," Thomas warned one evening as she sat by the fire, coughing into a handkerchief. "Let someone else take over for a few days." "I can't abandon them," she insisted, "not when they need me most." Thomas recognized the steel in her voice and didn't press further, but he doubled his efforts to lighten her load at home, taking over cooking and chores without being asked. The epidemic peaked in early February, claiming 3 lives: an elderly couple and, most heartbreakingly, 7-year-old Jenny Wilson, one of Eliza's brightest pupils. The funeral was held during a bitter snowstorm, the small grave nearly impossible to dig in the frozen ground. Eliza returned home from the service hollow-eyed and silent. That night she finally broke down, sobbing in Thomas's arms. "I couldn't save her," she wept. "I tried everything: cool compresses, willow bark tea, nothing helped." It wasn't your responsibility to save her, Thomas soothed, stroking her hair. You did all anyone could. But I know what it's like, she whispered, to fight for every breath, to feel the fire in your lungs. She pulled back to look at him, anguish plain on her face. What if that happens to me again? What if next time I'm the one who doesn't survive? Thomas held her gaze steadily. Then I'll be right beside you, fighting with everything I have. But Eliza, you can't live in fear of what might happen. We've had this conversation before. It's different now, she said. Seeing Jenny's parents today, I never want to cause you that kind of pain. Life causes pain, he said gently. Loving someone means accepting that risk. He placed his hand over her heart. But what we have right here, right now, that's worth any risk. Slowly, the grief and fear receded, replaced by a deeper appreciation for each day they were granted together. As winter released its grip on the land, Eliza found herself filled with a new sense of purpose and possibility. It was during the first real thaw of March that she realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. At first, she attributed it to stress and the lingering effects of the hard winter. But as other symptoms manifested tender breasts, a peculiar sensitivity to certain smells, a persistent queasiness in the mornings, she could no longer deny the obvious. She waited to tell Thomas until she was certain, consulting discreetly with Doc Winters, who confirmed her suspicions with a mixture of professional concern and personal delight. The pregnancy will put additional strain on your system, he warned. You'll need to be more careful than most women, rest frequently, avoid overexertion. But it's possible, she pressed. For me to carry to term, to deliver a healthy child, the doctor's expression softened. Many women with lung ailments have borne children successfully. Your health has improved significantly over the past year. With proper care and God's blessing, yes, it's entirely possible. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the newly greened landscape in gold, Eliza took Thomas's hand and placed it gently over her still flat abdomen. We're going to have a baby, she said simply. Thomas went utterly still, his eyes wide with wonder and a flash of fear she recognized all too well. A baby, he repeated, his voice hoarse. Are you certain? Doc Winters confirmed it today, she said. He thinks I'm about 2 months along. The baby should arrive in late September or early October. But your health, Thomas began, the worry she'd anticipated creasing his brow, will require careful monitoring, she finished for him. But Doc Winters believes with proper precautions, there's every reason to expect a normal pregnancy and delivery. Thomas's expression underwent a remarkable transformation, worry giving way to awe and then to a joy so pure it took her breath away. We're going to be parents, he whispered, gathering her gently into his arms. A family. Yes, she laughed, her own happiness bubbling up and spilling over. A family. He kissed her then, a kiss filled with promise and reverence. When he drew back, there were tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply. For what? She asked, brushing a tear from his cheek. For not giving up, that day in the rain or any day since. His hand caressed her stomach with infinite tenderness. For giving us this future I never dared hope for. The months that followed were a time of preparation and anticipation. Thomas threw himself into readying the nursery, crafting a cradle and a small rocking horse with the same care he'd given their chairs. Eliza continued teaching until the end of the school term in May, then reluctantly agreed to take a sabbatical until after the baby's birth. The town council has hired Miss Peterson to fill in, she told Thomas after the decision was made. She's barely 20 and has never managed a classroom before. She'll learn, Thomas assured her, just as you did, and you'll be back before you know it. As summer progressed, Eliza's body changed, her belly swelling with new life. The pregnancy was not without difficulties. The August heat brought breathlessness and swollen ankles, while the baby's increasing size pressed against her lungs, occasionally triggering coughing fits that left her exhausted. Thomas watched over her with loving vigilance, refusing to let her overexert herself while still respecting her independence. He hired a local girl, Abigail Porter, to help with housekeeping 3 times a week, and made sure Doc Winters visited regularly to check on mother and child. "You're hovering again," Eliza teased one evening as Thomas insisted on bringing her tea while she sat reading on the porch. "Can't help it," he admitted, settling into his chair beside hers. "Never thought I'd have this: a wife, a child on the way, a home that's more than just a place to lay my head." He reached over to take her hand. "Still can't quite believe it's real sometimes." "It's real," she assured him, guiding his hand to her belly where the baby was particularly active. "Very real." The first pains began in the early hours of September 28th, gentle at first, then increasingly insistent. Thomas, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation, was immediately alert. "Is it time?" he asked, already reaching for his clothes. "I think so," Eliza confirmed, breathing through the discomfort. "But there's no rush yet. First babies often take their time." This one, however, seemed impatient to meet the world. By the time Thomas returned with Doc Winters and the midwife, Mrs. Cooper, the pains were coming regularly and with significant force. "This little one's in a hurry," Mrs. Cooper observed after examining Eliza. "Won't be long now." Thomas paced anxiously in the hall while the women prepared the bedroom, setting out clean linens and heating water. When they allowed him back in, Eliza was propped against pillows, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes clear and determined. "Stay," she said, reaching for his hand as another contraction built. "I need you here." For the next 6 hours, Thomas didn't leave her side, supporting her through each wave of pain, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. As the sun rose over the mountains, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Eliza gave one final, tremendous push, and their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry that was the sweetest sound either of them had ever heard. "She's perfect," Doc Winters announced, placing the squalling infant on Eliza's chest. "A fine, healthy girl." Eliza gazed down at the tiny, red-faced creature, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it seemed to physically expand her heart. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Thomas's face as he beheld his daughter for the first time was a study in wonder. Tentatively, he reached out to touch the downy dark hair that already showed signs of his own chestnut color. "She's so small," he marveled. "But strong," Mrs. Cooper assured him. "Listen to those lungs." "No weakness there." They named her Sarah Grace Sarah for Thomas's mother, Grace for the blessing they considered her to be. As Eliza recovered from the birth, Thomas proved himself an adept and devoted father, willingly changing nappies and walking the floor with his daughter when she fussed in the night. "You don't have to do it all," Eliza told him one night, watching as he gently rocked Sarah back to sleep after a feeding. "I'm feeling much stronger now." "I want to," he said simply. "Spent too many years thinking I'd never have this, don't want to miss a moment." By Sarah's first birthday, Eliza was back teaching 3 days a week, having worked out an arrangement with the school board that allowed her to balance her profession with motherhood. Her health remained stable, the occasional respiratory infections treated promptly, and without the complications she had once feared. Thomas's horse breeding business flourished, his eye for good stock and fair dealing earning him a reputation throughout the territory. The ranch expanded, requiring the hiring of 2 full-time hands who lived in the bunkhouse Thomas had added to the property. Their life settled into a rhythm of seasons, spring bringing new foals and planting, summer filled with training horses and tending the vegetable garden, autumn with harvesting and preparing for winter, and the cold months spent in the cozy warmth of their home, planning for the year ahead. Sarah grew into a spirited, curious child with her father's hazel eyes and her mother's determined nature. By 3, she was riding her own pony, a gentle mare Thomas had bred specifically for her and insisting on helping with ranch chores. It was during Sarah's 4th winter that Eliza discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved easier than the first, her body seeming to remember the process. In June of 1887, their son Thomas James Larson, Jr., was born, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features. 2 children, Eliza marveled as she watched Thomas supervising 5-year-old Sarah's careful holding of her new brother. "Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate we are." "Not fortune," Thomas corrected gently. "Faith in each other in the future even when it seemed darkest." He was right, she realized. It had been faith that had sustained them through those early uncertain days, Thomas's unshakable belief that her illness would not define their story. And eventually, her own acceptance that love was worth the risk of heartbreak. The years flowed one into another, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Riversbend grew from a small settlement into a proper town with a telegraph office and by 1890, a railway spur that connected it to the main line. The Larson Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the West for its quality quarter horses and Thomas's fair business practices. Sarah, intelligent and determined like her mother, excelled in school and eventually followed in Eliza's footsteps, becoming a teacher herself. Young Thomas, or TJ as he came to be known, inherited his father's way with horses and natural leadership, working alongside him from an early age with the clear expectation that he would one day take over the ranch. Through it all, Eliza's health remained relatively stable. There were difficult winters when her cough returned, frightening episodes that harkened back to those early days, but with proper care and the advances in medical understanding, these became less frequent and less severe as the years passed. In the spring of 1898, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a gathering of friends and family on their ranch, Thomas pulled Eliza aside for a private moment on the porch where their rocking chairs still sat side by side, weathered now but sturdy as the day he had crafted them. "Remember that day in the rain?" he asked, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes still bright with the same warmth that had captivated her 2 decades earlier. "How could I forget?" she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was trying so hard to stand on my own even as I was falling." "And I was just passing through," he mused, "never planning to stay more than a night or two." "God had other plans," Eliza said softly. Thomas nodded, his gaze taking in the ranch they had built together, their children now grown or nearly so, the life they had forged despite all odds. "When I told you that day that you'd never scare me off, I meant it, but I never imagined all this." He gestured expansively. "Never imagined being so blessed." "Nor did I," Eliza admitted. "I was so certain my illness would be the end of my story, not the beginning of ours." Thomas pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple where strands of silver now mingled with the auburn. "Best decision I ever made, stopping in this town. Best words I ever spoke, telling a stubborn, frightened woman that I wasn't going anywhere." "Best words I ever heard," Eliza whispered, turning in his arms to meet his gaze directly. "And the truest promise anyone ever kept." As twilight deepened around them, casting long shadows across the land they had tamed together, they remained on the porch, rocking gently in the chairs that had witnessed so much of their shared life. The sound of their grown children's laughter drifted from the house, a testament to the legacy they had built not just in wood and stone, but in love and perseverance. In the years that followed, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, bringing automobiles and telephones and changes neither could have imagined when they first met, Thomas and Eliza Larson remained constants in each other's lives, companions, lovers, partners in all things. And if sometimes, on cold winter nights when the mountain wind howled around their sturdy home, Eliza's breathing grew labored and the old fear surfaced in Thomas's eyes, they faced it as they had faced everything else together, with the quiet courage of those who understand that love is both fragile and indestructible, a paradox as enduring as the mountains that had witnessed their beginning. For Thomas had spoken true that rainy day in Riversbend. She had never scared him off, not with illness, not with uncertainty, not with the 1,000 natural worries that came with building a life together. And in that steadfast presence, Eliza had found not just healing for her body, but salvation for her soul, the courage to embrace each day as the gift it was. and to face whatever the future might hold with the same unwavering faith that had carried them through their journey from strangers to beloved companions, from solitude to family, from fear to joy. In the end, that was their true legacy, not the ranch or the children, or even the years they were granted together, but the simple, profound truth that love, when chosen daily despite all reasons to turn away, becomes the most powerful healing force of all.